Slides.
I think we're ready to go. I believe we are live. And I'm going to hand it off to Nadia. She's going to start us off.
All right. Well, welcome to this session. My name is Nadia Moya, and I'm here with Dareen Khatib, and we are from the Orange County Department of Education. And we're going to be highlighting the new California Health Education Framework that was adopted in May of 2019. Some of our intended outcomes today, we're going to look at the role of the new health education framework, the implementation project, and how it supports educators and students across the state. We're going to look at some common understandings of what health education in California schools is and a shift in approaches. We want to understand the guidance of the framework and how it supports the implementation of skill-based health education. And then we're going to explore a bunch of new strategies and tools and resources that will ensure all learners have access to high-quality health education. So the project was, the California Health Education Framework was adopted in May of 2019. And the primary purpose of the framework is to provide guidance for teachers of health education that will assist them in addressing changes in health education instruction. So we have standards in health education, which were adopted in 2008. Now we have a new framework. So standards tell us what to teach, frameworks give us the guidance on how to teach health education. Along with the framework, there's a statewide effort in providing professional learning and resources for this implementation. So I'm going to dive into a little bit about the project and the professional learning and resources that are becoming available. We actually started our first sessions at the beginning of this year, which seems like a lifetime ago. And it's rolling out through the end of this year and next year. So our Health Education Framework project, which is being led by Orange County Department of Ed in conjunction with CDE, all of our project is guided by a statewide health collaboration committee. And the health collaboration committee is health education experts, content experts, higher education experts, as well as representation from county offices and Department of Eds across the state, who come together to really provide guidance on the project and all of the details of the project. So the project consists of online administrator and teacher leadership modules, which we're going to look at a little bit later. Professional learning convenings, so a set of 4 sessions of professional learning on the new health education framework, as well as a health education website, which is we're planning to roll out at the end of summer. And this will really hold all of the resources from the framework, as well as outside resources that our content experts and experts all across the state have gathered, kind of like a one-stop shop for health education in California, which is very exciting. So I want to look a little bit at our professional learning timeline. In 2019-2020, we rolled out the first health education professional learning session 1. And we actually convened these in person in January, February, and March, which seems like a different world. The idea is that the county offices, we roll these out to county offices, and then county offices go back and provide this professional learning for all of their districts and teachers. Obviously, a lot of those are being adapted onto an online space because of the necessity now. So those are things you're going to want to look out for in your districts and in your regions for these professional learnings that your county offices will roll out. This upcoming year in 2020, 2021, we have 3 sessions. Now, The first session was really an overview of health education, which is actually, this presentation is an hour version of a day-long training. So this is just a little snippet of what you would see in the first session. The next 3 sessions are really deep dives into health education content and teaching practices. So every session we're going to highlight 2 of the content areas in health education, as well as dive into the framework's resources, the activities, and how to plan your instruction for health education. So session 1, which will be at the beginning of the year, will focus on nutrition and mental health. Session 3 will focus on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and then personal and community health. And then session 4 will look at growth and development and sexual health and injury prevention and safety. Now, when we talked about a shift in health education, what we're really talking about is shifting to a skills-based health education. Although skills have been part of the health education standards for a very long time, there's a tendency to, when we teach health, just teach about knowledge, right? Just teach about health information, the 5 food groups, why not to do, drugs. But what we're really seeing in health education is a huge shift to skills-based health education to really develop health literate students, which is what we want. We want our students to be health literate. And although knowledge is very important, skills really are what's going to help them change behavior. So when we teach interpersonal communication, that skill can be transferred across all content areas. We can learn how to communicate when we don't want to do drugs, just like we can when we want to choose healthy foods. So we really want to focus on this skills-based health education so students are learning this along with the content knowledge. Now, in health education, we have 8 overarching standards. The first standard is the essential health concepts. So this is your fundamental health knowledge. We obviously need that when we're teaching health. The next 7 standards are all skill-based standards. So standard 2 is analyzing health influences. So what affects your choices, what influences do you have, inside and outside influences that affect the way that you make choices. Accessing valid health information. This is huge right now. This is always huge, right? Where do I go to get valid health information and resources? What is a valid source? Is it reliable? Where am I getting it from? And we know with, the internet and information that's out there, not everything's reliable, and students really need to learn the skill of how to find good information. Interpersonal communication. So this involves negotiation skills, refusal skills across all content areas. How are we talking to each other? How are we communicating? Decision making, a fundamental health skill, right? We have to, think about what decisions we make. Are they good choices? What are the pros and cons? How do I make a plan? As well as goal setting, not just choosing a goal, but how do I make an action plan to be able to accomplish that goal? Practicing health enhancing behaviors. So this, we get a little bit along, down the line of the standards now. We've learned that the essential concepts, we learned some of the skills. Now we're putting those into practice. How are we actually practicing these health enhancing behaviors like goal setting and decision making and communication that we've learned? And then last, which is very exciting, it's our standard 8, which is health promotion. In the national standards, it's called advocacy. And this is how are you advocating for yourself, for your family, for your community in the realm of health. So we created, through the project, we created this model, this health literacy model. So we really took the standards and wanted to show how building and teaching on these standards increases your health literacy. So for example, essential concepts. If I just teach about the 5 food groups, okay, that's fundamental health knowledge. But my health literacy, if I just know what the 5 food groups are, isn't very high because I haven't assessed what's good information. How do I know where I'm getting good information from? I haven't figured out how to make decisions about choosing those healthy foods. I haven't set goals to, actually eat those healthy foods. So we see essential concepts is at the bottom. We need fundamental health knowledge. But as we build up those skills, our health literacy increases to the point where we can promote health, we can advocate for our health, the health of ourselves and others. So we can see how health literacy builds through the standards. Now in health education, we have 6 content areas. I know sometimes it's a little confusing because we have standards and content areas, and I'll show you next how they're combined. But in health education, we have nutrition and physical activity, growth and development and sexual health, injury prevention and safety, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, mental, emotional, and social health, its own content area in health education, and then personal and community health. So as we can see, the health literacy model and the content standards go together. We're really building these skills through each content area. So in the standards, every content area will have standards in all of these sections. So for example, in nutrition, physical activity, you're going to have essential concepts. You're going to have analyzing influence of the things that you eat. You're going to be accessing valid information. And really the goal is to see how that learning builds through the standards, through that content area. Although skills can be interchangeable, we use decision-making, for example, in growth and development, just like we do in alcohol, tobacco, other drugs. In the standards, they are going to be content specific when you're, planning lessons. But know that these standards, the skill standards really are across the board. You're going to be learning those skill standards in every single content area in health education. Now this looks like a lot. So let's look at how it's broken up. So this chart is actually right from the health education standards, the 2008 standards, and it is replicated as well in the framework. But it shows as teachers who are planning their health education lessons, what we teach and what standards are covered in each grade. So what you'll notice is in the elementary grades, outside of kindergarten, so 1 through 6, there are only 3 content areas covered in each of the elementary school grades. So example here, 4th grade has nutrition and physical activity, injury prevention and safety, and then alcohol and tobacco and other drugs. Okay, if we go up to 3rd grade, it's going to be different. It's going to be growth and development, mental emotional health, and personal community health. So in all the elementary school grades, you're going to be having 3 content areas that need to be covered. And that knowledge builds because we can see in 2nd grade is nutrition, physical activity, and then you hit it again in 4th grade and then 5th grade. Once we get into 7th and 8th grade, you're hitting all of the content areas, okay? As well as high school, you're hitting all of the content areas. The one thing I did want to point out is that you'll notice that growth and development and sexual health is broken up into 2 sections. It's not until 5th grade that students start receiving sexual health content and instruction. So we know this as usually that's when they start learning about puberty and body changes. So sexual health is not taught in any of the grades above 5th grade. So that's just something to note. So health education is an important piece of an overall curriculum. And in fact, per the education code, it is required instruction in grades 1 through 6. So health education is part of a course of study that includes English, mathematics, social science, visual performing arts, and physical education. Health is a key part of that. So in elementary school, teachers are required to teach health education. This changes a little when we get into middle and high school. So middle and high school, health education content is required for all students. For example, our California Healthy Youth Act requires that comprehensive sexual health education is taught once in middle school and once in high school. So that is required content. However, how that content is delivered is really a local decision. So that means each school district can choose how they want to teach health. So it could be a year-long class that they want to have in their school. It could be they want to teach health education in other content areas. Like it's very common to see health education or like sexual health taught in science class or PE class. Not always the best practice, but they do have the choice to do that. They can choose whether it is a year-long class, whether it is a half-year class, whether it is a graduation requirement. So those are all local decisions. Along with health education content that's required, as well as the course of study, we do know we have many mandates and initiatives that touch on health education are directly related to health education, which is one of the reasons we really, advocate for having a health education course, because there are so many of these mandates initiatives that just fit beautifully right into a health education course, and we don't have to think about how we're going to teach them throughout the other content areas. So in nutrition and physical activity, we have the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, which requires schools that participate in the National School Lunch Program have a local wellness policy, and part of that is a skills-based health and physical activity education piece. We have the California Healthy Youth Act, which requires, again, sexual health, comprehensive sexual health instruction once in middle school and once in high school. As part of that, there also is instruction required in human trafficking. It's incorporated in the California Healthy Youth Act. We know across the state we have lots of schools and districts involved in TUPE, so teaching the tobacco use prevention education programs. In mental, social, emotional health, we have the suicide prevention mandates. So mandating not only education, but prevention, postvention, and interventions. And I think that's K through 12 now. Dareen, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the environmental principles and concepts, which is actually being incorporated into all of the new frameworks. In fact, the VAPA frameworks just came out that incorporates environmental principles and concepts. And this is really how humans and the environment interact, and what effects on health that can cause. And you can imagine the direct link that has with health. Like I said, instructional delivery models, we like to talk about in 9 through 12, but also it's really 7 through 12. In elementary school, obviously your elementary school, multi-subject credential teacher is going to be teaching health, and is really a best practice. In 7 through 12, some of the less effective practices is when we are adding health education content to other areas. So, for example, putting your comprehensive sexual health education into a science class, or shoving nutrition into physical education, having PE teachers teach that content. And that's mainly because really we want credentialed health teachers teaching health to be able to teach those skills. Sometimes the skills get lost when we're putting that content into other areas. Less effective practices are summer school courses, only because they're so short. That's really skill building takes a long time, and we need that time to practice those skills. And sometimes those truncated courses are a little short for that. Online health courses. Obviously, we're running into an issue now where everything's going online. So before we really, talked about this as a less effective practice because, again, we couldn't practice those skills. Now, as distance learning is really improving and people are coming up with innovative ideas, the hope is really we can figure out how to, teach skills, in either synchronous or asynchronous ways online. But in general, when we're having, kids in the classroom with a teacher practicing health skills, that's really like the ideal. Best practices is that health is a graduation requirement. And again, this is a local decision whether health is a graduation requirement or even a course at all. So best practice is having a year-long course or even a semester course in health. Not all high schools, not all districts have health courses. And then, higher level is having health education course as an A through G course, college preparatory elective. And some school districts have, written the requirements for their courses to be counted as an A through G course. Lastly, before we get into the highlights of the framework, I just wanted to reiterate what the standards in the framework are and how they're different. So standards, which came out in 2008, really are the what. So what am I teaching my students? So for example, here in middle school injury prevention and safety, standard 3, we're analyzing sources of information regarding injury, violence prevention. Doesn't tell you how to do that. It just tells you what students need to know. So the framework gives us those solid activities, ideas of how to teach those standards. So for example, if we're going to teach that standard, maybe we're going to have our students make safety video vignettes. And it gives you some examples of how to do that that teachers can really use to build out a skills-based health education lesson. So that's the difference between the standards and the framework. So the framework has so many great activities, so much great information. And we're going to look at some of those highlights next. So I'm going to hand this over to Dareen to go into the California Health Education Framework highlights.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nadia. So I have been putting some questions and answers that I'm making available to hopefully all viewers, so everybody should be able to see the answers. And really what I'm hoping to share with you is some links to some of the information that Nadia has already shared that I'll also be sharing. So I gave you the link to the health education framework, the current chapters. Like Nadia said, the framework is final. It's just awaiting the beautiful publication that will then be made available on the CDE website. But for now, it's all of the chapters are individually accessible. So I just gave you a Google folder, a link to a Google folder where they're all available for you to explore. I also gave you the link to the standards, to the PDF of the health education standards. And then I'm going to review a couple of things that I also added some links for you to access there. If you cannot access the links, or I have just put in some things that I'm not sure about, or I did it wrong, feel free to throw a question out there and we'll make sure that we get you this information. So thank you, Nadia, for kind of setting the stage. I hope the information that has been shared thus far makes you really see the connections to a lot of what we're doing on school campuses, a lot of our current initiatives, a lot of what is important in education right now, that there's a strong connection to health education. I know there's already a bias because you're all here because obviously you're interested in health education, but we're really hoping that with everything that's happening right now, we have more and more educators who are willing to integrate this content into their classroom, and hopefully administrators and leadership that are willing and committed to allocating time and attention and some love to this as a course or as an elective or as definitely a standalone where we could focus on the skills and gaining those skills and not just the knowledge of our students. So framework, if you have not read all of the fun chapters, I'm going to give you some broad strokes. Like Nadia said, there's going to be various professional learning opportunities that each of your county offices of education will be hosting in the upcoming year. Really, the framework has some really great supporting chapters. And early on in the introduction chapters and in supporting health education chapters, there is a lot of reference to data, which is really, really important. And I like to say that we ask our students a lot of questions. We're constantly saying, can you fill this out? Can you fill this out? What are we doing with this data? We have a responsibility to them to do something about the data that we're collecting from them. And really, data is technically the voice of our students. So what are they telling us? What are they saying when they are filling out those surveys and and giving us the data that we're asking them to give us? The framework has some really great data points that they add. These are literally 3 that we pulled out of chapter 1. They tell us a few different things. They tell us that most of our students are not getting the nutrition that they need for their cognitive development, for their physical development, for their social and emotional well-being. We know there's a direct link between healthy eating and your mental health. We know that 32% of 11th graders indicate that they've vaped. So what does that tell us? Why are we asking the questions? Does that data point have us pause and let's ask the questions why that they're engaging in that behavior? A more disturbing statistic, 32% of our 9th to 11th graders are sharing that they're feeling sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 or more consecutive weeks, which has impacted their daily activities. We know this is a symptom of depression. So the data we're collecting is very, very relevant. And really what we want everybody to pause and do is use the data to drive their decision making. And we feel like in health education, definitely in programming and in initiatives and services that we provide on campus, but specifically too for health education, when we're talking about building the knowledge and the skills of our students, we need to pause and say, in my school community, what is the data telling me is the most prominent need or is the most distressing health behavior for my students that I need to elevate? I need to maybe spend a little bit of extra time on that unit. I need to really think of different ways that we could expand it out of my classroom into the school community or even our local community. We really want the data to support not just initiatives and programs and services, but also the education that's happening in the classroom. I'm going to point out 2 surveys that I'm pretty sure most of you are very well aware of. One of them being the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which kind of gives us more of a statewide perspective on some really amazing indicators. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey covers a more comprehensive list of indicators than the California Healthy Kids Survey, especially since the CHICS survey, not everybody completes all of the modules. The core modules only look at a few aspects of student health related behavior. So the YRBS is actually really a great comprehensive data set. And we actually now have weighted data. That means we have enough data and weighted data for that sample to be a representative of California, where that information actually supports or allows us to compare ourselves nationally across the nation, comparing ourselves with other states. I did put in the question, the link to the dashboard for the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. You could explore that dashboard. You could click on different indicators. You could even disaggregate some of the data by race, ethnicity, by sexual orientation, gender identity. So it really is a great tool to kind of give you that broad perspective of student health behavior. And then you're all, hopefully, I'm pretty sure you're all pretty familiar with the California Healthy Kids Survey. That is such a powerful set of data. And we're starting to see more and more county offices disaggregate that data to look at what are students saying based on what they've indicated as how they identify for their race and ethnicity and how they identify as far as their sexual orientation and gender identity. And when you disaggregate the data, there are clear disparities in regards to the health of our students. And that needs to be noted. Again, those disparities are going to differ from one county to the next, from one district to the next. And it's really on us to make sure that we're looking at those data sets to say, wait a minute, we need to do things differently. We need to do things better. And if anything, this is how I could, as a teacher, advocate for what I do and how important I believe health education is. And as an administrator and as leadership, that data can be used to communicate with families why we do what we do and why we have certain things in place to really support the health and well-being of our students. So I'm a strong advocate for data-driven decision-making across the board in all that we do. And I encourage you to explore the dashboards. I gave you the link to both of those dashboards. So that you could really start to look at more localized data. And more indicators are being added to those dashboards. So I want you to be patient, especially for chicks. That dashboard is a new feature. So more and more data is going to be added to really support that information that can really help guide you. If we had 5 hours, I would take you through some of the data and do an activity around that data. But hopefully your county, as they take you through professional learning or on the framework, will engage you in some of that localized data. The framework also addresses a couple of different frameworks or a couple of different national models. And I really want to kind of bring it to MTSS for us in California. So the multi-tier system of support is a statewide initiative that California is very much invested in. I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of MTSS. Some of you might play a greater role than others in regards to the implementation of the framework. But I really want to just pause here and make a connection to where health education connects to MTSS. MTSS, that multi-tiered, we are looking at tiered services. So the universal services that for the tier 1 services, that's what we are hoping that all students have access to, right? That's our prevention services. That's to build knowledge and skills and make sure students have everything that they're equipped, that they need to be equipped to lead daily productive college, career, and life-ready experiences. And really, that is where health education lies, because we are trying, can you imagine if all students, preschool all the way up to 12, had, scaffolded, skill-based education that's age-appropriate, where they were building on skills year after year? Can you imagine by the time they kind of encounter a risk, how they'd be able to handle that, what their coping mechanisms would be like in a stressful time or a stressful environment, how their mental health would be supported, how it would protect them and support them in becoming better learners. All of those things, really, if we did a good job for our universal supports, we would have less students needing tier 2 supports and even fewer students needing tier 3 supports. And that's where you see on the screen the some students and few students. Those are supplemental services. Some students might need supplemental services. And I'm not saying that if we did health education, we'd have no students needing supplemental services. That's really, we need to be investing mostly in our universal supports for all students so that we have less students needing supplemental and intensive. But I also want to point out that with health education, students could then self-identify. If we're really building their skills, they could also self-identify when they need help. They could say, you know what, I just, all of this information about human trafficking, I feel like I need to talk to somebody. And that could be where we have then that system to where that student can then have a supplemental support and maybe they need intensified supports. Or students are learning about suicide prevention and they see some information that they make some pause and think of a student or a peer, a friend that might need help. And they are then part of that process of really seeking the help that they need to be their best and to do their best and to live their most fulfilling lives. So health education is definitely a big part of the MTSS framework. And we want all of us who advocate for health education to advocate for this being a part. And yes, absolutely, social emotional learning is a huge part of health education, but so are behavioral health supports, and health education is an inclusive academic intervention as well. Take a breath here and talk to you a little bit about that access and equity lens. I know a lot of us are very much well aware of equity as I think a statewide, we've had a statewide I want to say, awakening in the last few years, especially now with everything that's happened with distance learning, and really us pausing and saying, wait, do we have equity in what students have to access distance learning? And even now with civil unrest and racial injustices really being on the forefront and the forefront of a lot of our minds, pausing and saying, do all of my students have access to what they need? And this is just a quick visual of equality versus access. And this connects very nicely to MTSS, because it's not just about, let's make sure all students have the same thing. It's recognizing that some students are going to need, again, those supplemental services or intensified services and supports, and that we need to meet them where they are, and we need to really support what they need when they need it. The framework has a really great chapter on access and equity, but also the access and equity supports are interwoven into all of the chapters in the framework. And this just kind of gives you some broad highlights of what they cover, including culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. They actually share some specific resources and some specific strategies. And of course, universal design for learning, making sure that students have a voice and a choice, and that we're really supporting all learners and giving all learners an opportunity to not only learn in the way that they need to learn, but also for them to demonstrate their competency and their learning in the way that best suits them as a learner. So there's some really great resources. I highly encourage you to check out that chapter. If you don't read the whole entire framework, definitely check out that chapter, some really great resources there. As a part of the California Health Education Framework Rollout Project, what Nadia already shared early on, that rollout project that we are supporting through the county offices of education, we also created some administrator and leadership supports. So we've created some quick links and FAQs, some really simple ways. These are not just for administrators. Teachers are also, we have a lot of teacher leaders and TOSAs and para-educators and instructional aides who play a leadership role. So we don't want this to be like, that's not for teachers, that's just for administrators. It's really for everybody. And that's why we call it administrator and leadership supports. So the quick links and the FAQs, those are going to live on the website, which, like Nadia said, will go live in the fall. But for right now, those, in addition to some learning modules on some support, some health education supports, one of them being access and equity, those are available through the Canvas platform. They are open access. Everybody and anybody could access all of these resources. And I added the direct link to those resources also in the questions. So one of the questions had the YRBS, the CHICS, and then also the administrator and leadership supports. Really quickly, there's also information in, not really quickly, the health education framework, if some of you have been following, kind of had a lot of attention on it because of because of CHAYA and comprehensive sexual health and a lot of the controversy around that topic. And really, I think for some time, it kind of overshadowed comprehensive health education and how important that is. Comprehensive health education is incredibly important as a content. So we have also built in a lot of support, especially for admin and leadership, to be able to speak accurately and effectively around that health education and where sexual health education fits in, that, you know, what is true and what is a myth in regards to what we teach and when we teach it when it comes to comprehensive sexual health education. And really all boils down to assuring folks that it is age appropriate and it is medically accurate, and that really we're trying to build the knowledge and the skills of kids around this very, very important topic that is much needed. So this link right here that you can access through the PDF will take you straight to the California Department of Education website for some really wonderful resources and supports. If you haven't checked it out lately, they've added a ton of additional resources, but also the administrator and leadership supports link that I provided will give you some additional support specifically around that topic. Okay, I hope I didn't talk too fast. I try to, slow it down, but it's just one of those biological things I cannot control. I'm going to hand it off to Nadia. She's going to take you through some resources around like the heart of the framework, the most important part of the framework for teachers and educators.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to go into the meat of the framework and give you the highlights of the grade span guidance. And what the grade span guidance is really all of those really rich activities that that connect to standards and teachers can use in their classrooms. So there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of how to teach health education in these chapters. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights, show you how it's broken up, and also introduce you to some new resources that we have created through this project to support teaching health, skills-based health education. So the grade spans are broken up into transitional kindergarten through third grade, grades 4 through 6, grades 7 through 8, and then grades 9 through 12. So each one has a separate chapter. The framework really highlights, there's pieces, they follow a kind of a rhythm. The framework really highlights a lot in each grade level, those learner attributes, which is what we're calling them. So those are descriptions of who learners are and how they learn at specific grade levels. So for example, a learner attribute for a kindergartner is going to be way different from a fourth grader, right? And then way different from a seventh grader. So for example, when we get into seventh grade, a learner attribute could be, students are, reaching their teenage years. They're really looking for independence. They really thrive on self-directed learning. And the importance of those learner attributes is, how do I use that information to start designing some of my instruction? So, we talked about universal design for learning. If I have students who are looking for independence, looking to make their own way, how do I design so that they're doing self-led projects? They're doing things that they're interested in. They're, doing authentic work that's not just busy work. So thinking about those learner attributes. In kindergarten, we have kids that, the base of a lot of kindergarten TK is play, right? Play is one of the most important ways they learn. So how am I designing my instruction to incorporate and learn through play? So that's why those are added in to really help guide teachers on some of those milestones and way that their students are learning at that age. We also have a lot of background information and research. So there's an overview of data and research surrounding all of the content areas. So it's broken up into content areas as well. So we would have up-to-date information about, for example, nutrition. So what is the data showing in terms of eating and new information at that grade level and what students need to know. So it is very information and research rich, which is great because that really can help our data-driven informing our lessons. And then the bulk of it is learning activities. So these are short descriptions of standards-based, skills-based activities that teachers can really use to build out bigger health lessons. Just these little snippets of ideas that can be used to create those really rich activities. And there are also larger chunks of the learning activities that are called classroom examples. And these are really cool because they're narratives of actual health education lessons, and it takes you through what it would look like in a classroom if this activity was taught by a teacher. So it gives you some of the teacher perspective, kind of takes you through exactly what the teacher's thinking, what they're doing, and how it would be, how it would actually be used in the classroom. So those are really exciting to see, those kind of learning activities come to life. The last highlight I wanted to talk about in the framework were in every section, so in every content area for every grade level, at the end of that section, the framework gives ideas on how we're partnering with our school, how we're partnering with our community, and how we're partnering with our family to engage student learning and health education. And they give so many wonderful ideas about how we engage these three groups to support student learning. So for example, if we're talking about partnering with our school, say we're doing a lesson on alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, and we're looking for valid information on that. I can go to my school librarian and partner with them to help teach students about accessing valid information, because that is actually a model library standard in California, is how are we finding good, valid information? So I can use them as a partner. I can partner with my school administration if my students make health promotion posters, and how am I going to push these out throughout the school? Can I link up with the social media people to, get students to write social media blasts for the school? So there's so many different ideas of how we can partner with our school in health education. And then with the community, how do we engage community partners in this work? As teachers, who in the community is reliable? Who do we go to? How do we vet those community partners? If I'm teaching a lesson on fire safety, can I partner with my local fire department to have them come in and teach, maybe present to the students, have them do an activity? So thinking of ways that we can really engage the community in our work. And then, of course, very important, partnering with family. And this, this really takes the form of taking that health information back that the kids have learned and talking to their family about it. So, for example, if I'm doing a lesson on emergency preparedness, I'm going to, design it so that my students are going to go back to their families and talk about what is our emergency plan for our house. Like, let's sit down and talk about it and write it out. And this is how we're engaging our family in all of this health information. So it really enriches student learning and makes it real. So along with the great resources that are in the framework, part of this project was creating some new resources. And as a Department of Ed, we have really, we saw an area that needed some support, and that was really in helping teachers learn how to teach skills. It's easy to say, just go teach the skills, but skills actually have steps that you need to follow in order to teach them and teach them comprehensively. So we've designed some standards guides, which is really a guide for each of the standards in each grade band to show how to teach skills. And I'll show you that in a minute. We've also created some skills posters, which can support learning for teachers because they can print them out, put them up in their classroom, refer to them. Students can see them and use them in their work. And we're also creating a handful of model learning activities. And what these are really taking pieces of the framework, learning activities, and building them out, universally designing them to give teachers models on how to use these activities in the framework to build out lessons or lesson sequences from start to finish. So let's look at the standards guides. This is the little thumbnail of what it looks like, but I believe Dareen put in the Q&A links to all of the standards guides, so you can browse them. So we've created a standard guide for each of the 7 skill standards for each of the grade spans. So there'll be a K through 3, a 4, 6, a 7, a middle school, and a high school. So we've taken each of the standards. So for example, this is standard 2, analyzing influences. We give a little bit of background. Why is this skill important? And then we model. What do the skills cues or skill steps look like? Okay, so these are really the steps that you would go through, the steps that you would teach students on how to successfully do this skill. And then there's opportunities to practice this skill because, this is our, you teach why it's important. We're going to model that skill and then we're going to practice that skill. And what's cool is the practice is really set up to connect back to the framework. So if you see the little box at the bottom, you'll see all of the different content areas. What we've done is pulled out activities from the framework that teach analyzing influences in each of these content areas. So if a teacher says, you know, I really want to teach analyzing influences in nutrition and physical activity, I can go down to this box and say, oh, there is a activity in the framework I can go to for examples. Obviously, when we get the finished published version of the framework, all of these are going to be tied to page numbers as well. We're still waiting on that, so everything is still a little bit of a work in progress. But this gives teachers a great tool to start designing those lessons and, you know, having those activities right at hand. They don't have to dig through it. They can go right to the page and say, here's an activity I can teach analyzing influences with. Along with the standards guides, we've created skills posters. So this is pulling out those skill steps. So for example, analyzing influences, the steps that you go through, you recognize a variety of pressures. What are the inside pressures? What are your outside pressures? Okay, students are going to think about those, do activities about discovering what those are. Then analyzing the effects of those pressures, and then making conclusions about your health influences. So what's great about these posters is that students can have them readily available in their notebooks. They can be blown up to poster size and put on the wall so that there's always that visual that students and teachers can go back to remember what are the steps I need to take in order to successfully complete and do the work in this skill. And then last but not least are the model learning activities. So these, you can see little snippets of these. We're highlighting the skills, but we're also universally designing these so that we really show teachers how you can create lessons, units, lesson sequences that are really supporting all of your students' needs, and they're universally designed so students have voice, they have choice, it's authentic, the work that they do is meaningful, and they're all based on activities that come straight from the framework. And not only have we universally designed them, we've also tied in social emotional learning. So we've highlighted in each of these lessons where students are being supported in learning social emotional learning skills. So self-awareness, self-management, decision-making, which of course is a health skill as well, relationship skills, communication skills, all of these blend beautifully with health education standards and content. And we really wanted to make it explicit where in these lessons, in these activities, that social emotional learning is really highlighted and students are building those skills as well. And all of these lessons will be ready as we roll out sessions 2 through 3 this upcoming year. So access to those will be upcoming. Last but not least, we wanted to talk a little bit about the health education website. As we said before, this is going to roll out in the fall, and this is going to have all of the new resources. It's going to have the administrator and leadership modules, quick links, FAQs. It will have resources for family, for the community, and all of the resources that are pulled from the framework, organized for educators, for administrators and leadership, for families and community, and structured by grade band so that it will be very easy to navigate and find all of that great information that you're looking for. So look out for that. We're hoping to roll it out, like Dareen said, in September. And again, we just wanted to reiterate the professional learning timeline, which are going to be happening this year. So if for more information on that, obviously you can contact us, but your county offices of ed are the ones that are really going to be rolling out these sessions. So, you know, make sure you're checking in with them on any training schedules, training timelines to see when they're going to be hosting these trainings. Dareen, did you want to add anything?
Oh, that was awesome. I hopefully everybody is able to access the links that I added in the Q&A. I wish we could see you guys in person, and it would have been fun to kind of have a back and forth, but we really, really appreciate you being here in this virtual space. And we thank you so much for your dedication to student health and for attending our session.
Thank you. And we have about 5 minutes, so if anybody has any questions and you want to put them in the box or ask, we will be here for the next 5 minutes. Otherwise, thank you.